I moved to Oak Ridge Heights seeking silence. Not the kind of silence that weighs heavy and lonely, but the peaceful kind that hums between rustling trees, broken only by birdsong and the occasional dog bark down the block. My new home promised that kind of stillness. It was perched at the edge of the development, where the asphalt gave way to a narrow creek and a whisper of pine forest. The real estate listing called it the Crown Lot. I called it freedom. That feeling lasted exactly 42 hours. The first knock came while I was still unpacking boxes. I opened the door to find a woman in her 60s, short and stiff in a pressed peach blouse and orthopedic sandals, wielding a clipboard like it was a badge. "I'm Sharon Halpern," she announced, without waiting for me to ask. "President of the Oak Ridge Heights Homeowners Association." She didn't offer a handshake, just looked past me into the living room like she owned it. "You're new," she added, frowning at the half-unpacked boxes. "Which means you may not be fully aware of the neighborhood's regulations." I held her gaze. "I've read the bylaws. Thoroughly." That gave her pause, but not for long. She turned and pointed past my shoulder toward the backyard. "Then you'll know the rear fence on your property is in violation. It extends 12 feet into HOA-designated community land." I followed her finger. The fence? It had been there when I bought the place. An old, weathered barrier hugging the edge of the lot, separating my backyard from the creek that curled like a lazy vein beyond it. "There must be a mistake," I said. "My deed marks the property line just before the creek." She smiled, but it didn't touch her eyes. "Your deed is outdated. The HOA voted last year to repurpose that buffer zone as communal green space. I'm afraid the fence has to come down." I studied her, weighing her confidence. Either she truly believed she had the authority, or she was bluffing and expected me to fold. "No," I said plainly. Karen, though I didn't yet know she answered to that name, blinked. "Excuse me? I'm not removing anything until I see official documentation. From the county, not from a committee." Her lips thinned. "You'll be receiving a notice shortly." She turned and left without another word. No farewell, no smile. Just the measured march of a woman who wasn't used to being challenged. The notice came the next day, followed by 2 more. All from the HOA. The first cited unauthorized encroachment. The second threatened a $150 fine for noncompliance. The third promised legal action if I did not dismantle the fence by the end of the month. It didn't take long to realize this wasn't about the fence. It was about power. Every neighbor I spoke to had a Karen story. She'd fined the Michaels for having non-standard garden gnomes. She'd called animal control on a vet who kept a certified therapy dog. She'd even tried to ban bicycles from driveways because they were clutter. Most people just gave in. They didn't have the time or patience to fight someone who spent her retirement memorizing HOA codes. But I wasn't most people. I filed a request with the county land office. Within days, they sent me official boundary records. The property line hadn't changed in 12 years. My fence was legal. My land was mine. I emailed the documents to the HOA with a polite message. "Please cease all further communication regarding my property. Any attempts to enforce false claims will be considered harassment." Karen responded not with words, but with action. I came home from work to find 2 fence panels gone. Not damaged. Removed. Sawed off clean and left leaning against the side of my shed like discarded evidence. In their place stood a wooden stake bearing a fresh sign. "Future site of Oak Ridge Heights Community Garden." That night, I sat on my deck, beer in hand, staring at the wreckage of my fence and the cheap, smug little sign staked in my soil. I didn't yell. I didn't storm down the street demanding apologies. But something hardened inside me. Karen wanted control. She wanted to prove that rules bent when she pushed hard enough. She'd just picked a fight with the one neighbor who wouldn't break. The next morning, I documented everything. I photographed the fence damage from multiple angles, zoomed in on the jagged cuts, and made sure to include the HOA's garden sign in the background like a signature left at a crime scene. Then I filed a police report for trespassing and vandalism, quietly, without fanfare. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I wanted leverage. Karen, however, had other ideas. She escalated. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA board stating that due to continued defiance and unauthorized use of communal property, I was being fined $500 and subjected to a disciplinary hearing. No date, no time, just a veiled threat. I attended the next HOA meeting anyway. It was held at the community clubhouse, a beige building that looked like it was designed by someone allergic to fun. Inside, about 20 homeowners sat on folding chairs, trying to look interested. Karen stood at the front with her clipboard, flanked by 2 board members who nodded whenever she paused, like trained parrots. When I raised my hand to speak, Karen's expression didn't flicker. "This isn't a public forum," she said sharply. "You're here as an observer. I'm here as a property owner defending his legal rights." That got murmurs. Several heads turned. One man in the back gave me a thumbs up. Karen's tone hardened. "The matter has already been reviewed. The HOA has authority over easement boundaries and shared green space." I held up the certified county map and deed. "This land isn't shared. It's mine. And unless the HOA intends to purchase it at full market value, you're trespassing." A silence fell. Karen opened her mouth, then stopped. Her eyes flicked to the map. She knew. She'd probably known all along. But she couldn't admit it. Instead, she pivoted. "Even if the land is technically yours, the HOA has jurisdiction over exterior modifications. That fence is a modification. And the board has decided it doesn't align with the community aesthetic." There it was. A new angle of attack. It wasn't about boundaries anymore, it was about control. The meeting ended with no resolution, only tension thick enough to cut. As I left, Karen watched me go with a smug calm, the kind that comes from knowing she had the structure, the board, and the apathy of most neighbors behind her. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly anticipate, was how much I enjoyed building things. Especially systems. Especially traps. If she wanted a battle over aesthetics, over appearances, I'd give her something unforgettable. But first, I needed time. And while I gathered materials and mapped out the next phase, Karen pushed harder. She began her campaign of attrition. The first attack came subtly. A noise complaint filed against me for hammering. The second was for excessive backyard clutter, tools neatly stacked behind my shed. The third? A formal letter demanding I trim the pines near the creek, citing fire hazards, even though they were on the opposite side of the property from any home. Each notice came with a fine. Each fine a deadline. They piled up like sandbags, trying to wear me down. I responded with calm precision. For every complaint, I sent back a certified response, complete with time-stamped photos, cross-referenced bylaws, and legal annotations. If Karen wanted to play paperwork games, I'd bury her in filings so meticulous they made her clipboard look like a napkin. Still, I knew this wouldn't end with bureaucracy. Karen didn't want compliance. She wanted capitulation. That's when I noticed something else, something deeper. Neighbors had begun to avoid me. Not out of hostility, but fear. They'd seen what happened to anyone who stood up to Karen. Lawn inspections, pet restrictions, even revoked clubhouse privileges for failure to RSVP. The HOA wasn't a community, it was a kingdom. And Karen was queen. So I decided to make her palace crumble. She thought she could lay claim to my backyard? Then it was time she learned what it meant to own it. And what I had planned next wasn't pretty. I started with the soil. A few discreet truckloads of nutrient-rich compost delivered under the guise of a backyard garden project. I had the receipts ready, filed neatly in a folder marked Organic Improvement Plan. From a legal standpoint, everything I did was within my rights. No structures, no violations, just a homeowner enhancing natural drainage. Next came the irrigation. Not a sprinkler system, but a series of discreet trenches I carved just below the grass line. They snaked through my yard, subtle as veins under skin, sloping gently toward the fence line. The one Karen had dared to cut. I rerouted my gutter runoff into the network. A few rainy days later, the system began to hum with life. The backyard transformed. The grass grew wilder, thicker. Frogs began to appear. Then dragonflies. The area just beyond the old fence post, Karen's so-called future community garden, became soft, waterlogged. I seeded fast-growing wetland plants, sedges, swamp irises, creeping rushes. Legal, native, and very, very damp. Karen noticed within the week. I was in the garage oiling my hedge trimmer when she marched up the driveway, her face flushed and tight like she was clenching something bitter between her teeth. "What on earth are you doing to that yard?" she snapped. "Restoring a wetland habitat," I replied pleasantly, wiping my hands with a rag. "Turns out this area used to be a marshland 50 years ago. I'm just bringing back the ecosystem." "You're flooding the property," she hissed. "Water is pooling into the green space." I shrugged. "There's no green space, remember? That land is on my deed. If there's pooling, it's just nature doing her thing." She blinked, stunned. "This is deliberate sabotage." "No, Karen. It's landscaping." She stormed off, but she wasn't done. Within days, I received another violation. This one citing unnatural water collection and mosquito breeding hazards. I responded with a certified report from the county extension office. The document confirmed everything I'd done was environmentally sound and even beneficial to local biodiversity. Still, Karen doubled down. She held an emergency HOA meeting. I attended, of course, sitting near the back as she delivered a dramatic speech about property values being threatened by reckless rewilding and how one neighbor was weaponizing nature. I calmly handed out laminated copies of my permits, filed neatly in presentation folders. I even included a QR code linking to the county's wetland preservation guidelines. One board member asked, "So, that's legal?" Karen didn't answer. She just stared at me, and I smiled. Because while she obsessed over bylaws and boundary lines, I was building something deeper. Something messier. The backyard was no longer just wet, it was alive. Tadpoles wriggled in shallow pools. Moss clung to fence posts. Birds returned in flocks, and their calls echoed across the cul-de-sac. I even installed a motion-sensitive wildlife camera and uploaded time-lapse to a YouTube channel titled Backyard Reclamation. The irony? People loved it. My videos, set to gentle music, featuring herons landing in misty puddles, started trending among nature lovers. The comments were filled with praise. Gorgeous restoration. This is how suburbia should look. More frogs, less HOA. Karen's power didn't fade overnight, but I could see the cracks. Neighbors began talking to me again. A few even slipped notes in my mailbox. "You're brave. Keep going." I didn't know we could push back. "Can you help me turn my side yard into a butterfly garden?" Karen tried to fight it, but her authority was like dry wood in my swamp, slowly rotting. And still, I wasn't done. One early morning, I added the final touch, a tall wooden sign just inside my property line. It was handcrafted, sanded smooth, and stained dark, with painted letters that read, "Welcome to Halpern Swamp, property of the HOA Queen." By noon, photos of the sign were circulating online. That evening, Karen stood at the edge of the marshy ground, hands clenched, lips trembling. She couldn't cross the waterlogged earth without soaking her orthopedic shoes. We locked eyes.
She didn't speak.
She just turned and walked away. For 2 weeks, Karen was silent. No letters. No fines. No urgent memos duct taped to my door. The swamp had done its job, visibly, publicly, and with undeniable flair. The air now carried a faint, earthy aroma. Bullfrogs croaked with confidence each night. And my wildlife camera captured something even more satisfying than a deer sipping from the marsh. It caught Karen, tiptoeing near the edge of my property in rubber boots, clutching a tape measure and flashlight. She was trying to document flood encroachment, likely hoping for a violation she could twist into an HOA emergency. The footage, complete with a startled shriek as she sank ankle-deep in muck, made the perfect final video for my backyard reclamation series. It went viral. Within days, local news picked it up under the headline, "Homeowner Restores Wetland, HOA Leader Not Amused." Viewers loved the story. It hit all the right notes: David versus Goliath, environmentalism versus bureaucracy, and yes, a little poetic comeuppance. The footage of Karen floundering in the mud became an instant meme. People began calling her Swamp Karen. But the real shift came during the next HOA election. Normally, no one paid attention. Karen and her loyalists reappointed each other year after year in what amounted to a ceremonial rubber stamp. But this time, people showed up. Lots of them. Neighbors who hadn't attended a meeting in years filed into the clubhouse, clutching printouts of bylaws, petitions, even highlighted copies of the HOA charter. The mood had changed. They were tired of being controlled, fined, and intimidated. They wanted their neighborhood back. Karen opened the meeting with her usual composure, but her voice faltered when it echoed back over a crowd no longer afraid. When the floor opened for nominations, her name was barely whispered. Instead, a young woman named Elise stood up, a military spouse, former landscaper, and mother of 3. She gave a speech that was short, passionate, and bulletproof. We deserve an HOA that serves the community, not controls it. She won by a landslide. So, did every other candidate not handpicked by Karen? One by one, her allies were replaced by fresh faces with real concerns and clearer intentions. The new board's first action? A motion to review all prior violation records under Karen's tenure. The second? A formal apology, addressed to me. It arrived in the mail, embossed and signed by the new president, Elise. We recognize the HOA's overreach in this matter and commend your lawful and inspiring efforts to preserve and enhance our shared environment. Attached was a check, a refund of every fine I'd ever been issued, and a note in Elise's handwriting. Thanks for reminding us what ownership really means. Karen? She resigned. Technically, she cited stress and health concerns, but everyone knew the truth. Her reign had ended not with a coup, but with a flood. And the throne she built from fear and bylaws had sunk under its own weight. Weeks later, I spotted her house listed on Zillow. Charming suburban retreat, near protected green space. She moved out in early spring. Her final act was to plant rose bushes near her mailbox, as if to erase the story she left behind. But the land remembered. My swamp, now a designated pollinator zone thanks to a county grant, thrived. Neighbors stopped by to visit, their kids chasing frogs and butterflies along the edge. What once was Karen's battlefield had become the heart of the community, wild, free, and unapologetically mine. I added a bench under the willow tree near the old fence line. Sometimes I sit there with a cup of coffee and watch the morning mist rise. It's peaceful, in the way only hard-won peace can be. One afternoon, Elise joined me. She looked out over the cattails and smiled. Hard to believe this used to be a battleground. Every empire falls, I said, sipping my coffee. Some just sink faster than others. She laughed. You ever think about joining the board? I raised an eyebrow. Only if we start meetings with a nature walk and end them with frog choruses. Deal. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the hum of cicadas and the soft burble of water. No more letters. No more threats. Just a backyard reclaimed, a tyrant dethroned, and a neighborhood reborn. And in the distance, just barely, the wind carried a faint croak, as if nature itself was having the last laugh.